10 years, or maybe 12. It's hard to pin down exactly when every day since then feels like a gray copy of the one before, haunted by what happened in Portsworth. That city, it breathes history, but the kind you find on weathered headstones and in attics thick with dust and forgotten sorrows. I was just another graduate student in archival studies back then, trying to unearth the past, while my own future seemed to be getting buried under a mountain of debt and the pressure of a dissertation that refused to take shape. My topic? Cycles of hysteria and moral panic in Portsworth. The urban legends that seem to resurface with every generation like a recurring fever. Little did I know I was about to become the latest symptom of that ancient sickness. Portsworth has a way of getting into you. The constant smell of the river and damp stone, the muffled tolling of the old cathedral bells, the Gothic architecture that seems to watch you, its windows like empty eyes. I lived in a shoebox room in the university district, a place where the wind whistled through the window cracks and heat was a seasonal luxury. Anxiety was my constant companion, a low hum in the back of my mind that grew louder with every bill that arrived, every blank page of my thesis. Sleep was fragmented, filled with dreams of endless archive hallways and indecipherable whispers. My research led me down to the damp basements of the municipal library, a labyrinth of groaning shelves and an almost suffocating silence. I spent days immersed in microfilm, the whir of the reader, and the scent of old paper becoming the soundtrack of my life. It was on one of those reels, lost in the pages of a defunct local paper called The Twilight Herald, dated from the 1950s, that I found it. Not a news item, but a minuscule advertisement, almost swallowed by the foxing of time, bordered with a strangely intricate design like dried vines. Wanted, attentive and dedicated observers, absolute discretion and meticulous. Record-keeping required for continuous night duty with the Society of Twilight Watchers. Mission: preservation and passive documentation of cyclical phenomena inherent to the local topography. Generous compensation and an environment conducive to silent contemplation. Inquire in person, 13 Umber Street. Society of Twilight Watchers. The name resonated like a tuning fork struck against the taut strings of my research. Cyclical phenomena? Passive documentation? It was bizarre, almost an academic parody. But the continuous night duty, the generous compensation, and especially the environment conducive to silent contemplation spoke directly to my desperation and my need for refuge from the cacophony in my own anxious mind. Curiosity, that dangerous intellectual itch that had led me to archival studies in the first place, began to prickle. This wasn't just a job. It felt like an artifact of the very history I was studying. 13 Umber Street. The building was even gloomier and more out of place in person. Decades of soot clung to the bricks, and the solid oak door seemed to absorb what little daylight there was. The brass number 13 was almost black. I hesitated, rationality battling need and morbid curiosity. I took a deep breath of the heavy, Portsworth air and pressed the doorbell. The sound was swallowed by the wood, leaving no apparent echo. I waited for what felt like an eternity. When the door finally opened with a long, protesting groan, the man who emerged was exactly how I'd imagine a curator of ancient secrets. Mr. Alistair Finch, tall, skeletal, dressed in a tweed suit that must have been my age, if not older. His eyes, behind thick spectacles, were like chips of obsidian, assessing me without blinking. The building's interior was dark, smelling of beeswax, dust, and something else. Indefinable, almost metallic. The interview was less an interview and more a silent appraisal. He led me into an office lined with leather-bound books bearing no visible titles, old maps of Portsmouth, and strange objects under glass domes, unusual-looking rock fragments, rusted tools, an open diary filled with almost illegible script. He didn't ask for my credentials. He sat behind a massive desk and asked, his voice as dry as autumn leaves, "Mr. Thorne, do you possess the capacity to witness without forming judgment? To record what you see, exactly as you see it, without the need to intervene or interpret?" I spoke about my dissertation, about my interest in the city's recurring patterns. A ghost of a smile touched his thin lips. "Excellent. Curiosity is a powerful engine. But remember, our role is preservation through observation, not participation. Passivity is paramount." He handed me a simple contract, one that spoke more of confidentiality than duties, and an advance in cash that made my heart pound. The task, he reiterated, was to watch over the shadow corridor from the abandoned tower on the edge of the district, every night, from sunset to sunrise. To note down anything anomalous in the provided journal. "There will be nights when nothing happens," he said, his eyes fixed on mine. "And there will be nights when you'll wish you hadn't seen anything. Just record it. Never, ever interfere. The consequences are permanent." The tower was a reliquary of decay. Loose bricks, creaking iron stairs coated in rust, the smell of dead birds and old rain. But the view was undeniable. The shadow corridor stretched out below like a diseased organ, a tangle of slanted roofs, crooked chimneys, and windows like black holes. The society had equipped the small room at the top with the essentials: the uncomfortable chair, the desk, the oil lamp casting dancing shadows, the incredibly powerful binoculars, and the thick leather-bound journal, its blank pages waiting to be filled. The first few weeks were an unexpected blessing. The absolute silence, the solitude. They calmed the storm in my head. I was finally writing. Pages of my dissertation flowed beneath the lamp's yellowed light. The shadow corridor seemed dormant. I recorded the mundane nightlife, couples arguing in silhouette, hurried delivery drivers, the occasional urban fox scavenging through trash. I noted it all in the journal, feeling an almost childish pleasure in my own diligence. But Portsmouth doesn't let peace last. The strangeness began subtly. The shadows in the narrowest alleys, they didn't behave correctly. They seemed to detach themselves from the walls, moving independently of any light source, pooling in dark corners before dissipating. Faint lights, like matches being struck and quickly extinguished, appeared in houses listed as uninhabited in the city records. Sometimes I'd hear things on the wind that battered the tower. Not just the usual howl, but fragments of whispers, muffled laughter, a persistent sound like something being dragged over stone. And then my focus was inevitably drawn to it. The House of Silence. Right in the heart of the corridor, standing out because of its unnatural stillness. It was as if sound itself died as it approached the house. It was there I started catching the first glimpses of the slender figure, a shape too tall, too thin, standing behind the second-floor window pane, a dark smudge against the interior blackness. I recorded it in the journal, my handwriting growing hastier. I decided to look for more about the house in the archives. I found fragmented accounts, diaries from former corridor residents, forgotten newspaper clippings. A pattern emerged, chillingly clear. Every 27 years, precisely, something happened in or around that house. Disappearances, psychotic breaks, unexplained fires, and always the accounts mentioned the tall shadow, the crooked man, the thing in the window. I even found an old journal from a 19th century police night watchman who described seeing a hunger made of night in that same window, shortly before a local merchant went mad and killed his own family. My research and my job began to merge dangerously. I was documenting the cycle in real time. I found, hidden under a loose floorboard in the tower, another journal. Older, the handwriting nearly illegible, the pages stained. The initial entries were mundane, like mine, but the later ones were frantic scribbles about the figure in the window. It sees me. I can't look away. The cycle demands an eye. The final entry was just an ink blot. Finch remained evasive during his weekly visits. When I showed him the old journal, he merely took it, flipped through it with disinterest, and said, "Previous records. The Society has a long history. Focus on your own observations, Mr. Thorne." The figure in the window of the House of Silence began appearing more frequently. Now, sometimes, I saw it move, gliding through the interior darkness with an unnatural fluidity. The feeling of being watched intensified, a cold weight on the back of my neck. Sleep became impossible again, even during the day. I was becoming part of the legend I was studying. Then Arthur Pendleton showed up. I'd seen him a few times at the library. A pale, intense man, always surrounded by stacks of books on Portsworth's most obscure folklore. He rented the House of Silence. I watched him unload boxes, audio recording equipment, night vision cameras. He was there to investigate, to challenge the legend. A chill ran down my spine. He didn't know what he was getting into. He was digging too deep. The night of the storm arrived like a fulfilled prophecy. The wind howled like lost souls around the tower, and the rain beat against the glass like insistent fingers. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the corridor in ghostly flashes. I was glued to the binoculars, heart hammering against my ribs, watching the small beam of Pendleton's flashlight dance inside the House of Silence. A blinding flash lit up the second floor, and there it was, the slender figure, fully visible for a fraction of a second. Taller than any man, thin to the point of seeming brittle, yet radiating an ancient, terrible strength. Its limbs were too long, bending at angles that would make bones snap. The makeshift hood of shadows covered where a face should be. But I felt a void there, a hungry absence that pulled at the light itself. It turned, not with a human motion, but like smoke reorienting itself, toward Pendleton's faint light on the floor below. There was no sound of breaking glass, no scream. Through the trembling lenses of the binoculars, I saw Pendleton's flashlight fall, rolling across the rotting floorboards. He appeared at the window, eyes bulging from their sockets, mouth wide in a silent scream, a scream the house itself seemed to absorb before it could escape. His body was racked by violent spasms, not electrical, but as if every fiber of his being was being unraveled from the inside out. The slender figure descended upon him, not touching, but hovering, and a palpable darkness began to emanate from it, enveloping Pendleton like a living shroud. His form flickered, lost definition, darkened, like a photograph burning from the inside out. In moments that felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye, he was gone, consumed, undone. The figure seemed to pulse, slightly denser, before receding like a black tide into the impenetrable darkness within the house. The window was empty, save for the rain beating against the glass. Terror hit me like a physical blow. I dropped the binoculars, which landed on the floor with a dull thud. My body was shaking uncontrollably. I scrambled for my phone, clumsy, sweaty fingers, barely able to dial. I stammered to the operator, a strangled voice talking about a murder, a thing in the window, the house of silence. "Do not interfere," Finch's voice echoed in my head, but it was too late. I had seen. I had to do something. The arrival of the ID sirens was a bittersweet relief. The flashing lights painted the rain blue and red, an unholy intrusion into the corridor's darkness. I watched from the tower as the police officers, soaked and tense, broke down the door of the House of Silence. They swept the interior with powerful flashlights. Minutes later, they emerged, shaking their heads, their faces a mixture of confusion and irritation. They conferred briefly, and then one of them climbed up to the tower. He eyed me suspiciously. "House is empty, kid. Clean as a whistle. No sign of a struggle, no body, nothing. Just a lot of dust, and a bone-chilling cold. You been drinking, or something?" I tried to explain about the society, about Finch, but he just rolled his eyes. "Never heard of 'em. Look, it was probably just the storm playing tricks on your eyes. Go home." They left, letting the darkness and the silence, a silence now much heavier, retake the corridor. It was then I heard the familiar creak of the tower door below. Finch climbed the stairs, his black umbrella dripping onto the wooden floor. He seemed completely unperturbed by the storm or my state of panic. "An active night, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice calm as ever, as he picked up the journal I had dropped. He opened it to the page where my hysterical scribbles attempted to describe the indescribable. Excellent detail. Precision is key to documentation. "Documentation?" I nearly shouted. "That thing? It killed a man! Did you know? Did you know this was going to happen?" Finch regarded me with an expression that might have been pity, or perhaps just clinical disinterest. "Mr. Thorne, the society has existed for a very, very long time. We observe the cycles of Portsworth. The entity in the House of Silence is one such cycle, ancient, recurring. It feeds on undue attention, on curiosity that breaches boundaries. Mr. Pendleton, like others before him, dug too deep into secrets best left buried." He paused, his eyes meeting mine in the gloom. "We do not interfere because we cannot. The cycle is larger than us, but it requires witnessing. The observer, the watcher, is what anchors the event in reality, in a way. Without the record, without the gaze, perhaps the pattern would unravel in even more chaotic ways. Your function is vital, Mr. Thorne, more vital than you realize." His calm, his acceptance of horror as mere routine, was more terrifying than the entity itself. I wasn't an employee, I was a sacrificial witness, perhaps even an unwitting catalyst. I couldn't go back to that tower. I left a short note on the desk the next night, saying I quit, and fled Portsworth as if the city itself were chasing me. I abandoned the dissertation, dropped out of grad school. The thought of returning to those archives, to those stories, made me nauseous. I tried to start over somewhere else, under a different name, seeking anonymity in a big, noisy city, as far as possible from the oppressive silence of Portsworth. For a while, it almost worked. I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare, induced by stress, lack of sleep, the atmosphere of that old city, until, some years later, working a menial, anonymous job in a different university library, I had to organize a donation of old photographs and glass negatives. One particular box, with no clear identification, contained scenes of Portsworth, dated, according to a loose note, from the early 1950s. I leafed through the images with a mix of morbid nostalgia and apprehension. And then I froze. A sharp, black and white photograph of the observation tower on the edge of the shadow corridor. Exactly as I knew it. But it wasn't the tower that caught my eye. It was the figure in the top floor window. A man holding binoculars, his face partially obscured by shadow, but unmistakable. The same bone structure, the same tilt of the head. It was my face. Not as I am now, older and marked by fear, but as I was back then, the desperate graduate student who answered a classified ad, looking out over the shadow corridor, 70 years before I was even born. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. The ad, the easy job, Finch, the passive observation, the cycle. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't chance. I had been called, or maybe I had never left. I'm still here, in another city, under another name. But every night, when the lights go out and the world grows quiet, I feel it. That weight, that expectation, as if somewhere, in some dark window, eyes that are not eyes are watching me, waiting, because the cycle needs a watcher, and I am a twilight watcher, and I fear my shift never truly ends.